Alien barbarians took my wife and child. I swore revenge. But one moment made me freeze. The crimson sun cast long shadows across the rocky landscape as Kai finished gutting the six-legged antelope. Its blue blood stained his hands and forearms, creating a stark contrast against his tan skin. The hunt had been grueling. 3 days of tracking through the unforgiving canyons of Xenos, sleeping in rocky crevices, and surviving on minimal water and dried rations. But it had paid off. The antelope was large, its meat dense and nutritious. It would feed his family for at least 2 weeks. Kai wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist, inadvertently leaving a streak of blue blood across his forehead. The temperature was already dropping as the sun descended toward the jagged horizon. Nights on Xenos were cold, with temperatures plummeting to near freezing despite the scorching days. He needed to begin the journey home soon if he wanted to arrive before full darkness. He surveyed his surroundings one last time, taking in the breathtaking alien landscape. As one of the first geological engineers sent to colonize Xenos, Kai had developed a deep appreciation for the harsh beauty of this world. The crimson sun bathed everything in a perpetual sunset glow, transforming the blue deserts and emerald oases into something otherworldly yet magnificent. The rock formations that surrounded him were composed of minerals unknown on Earth, creating crystalline structures that caught the light and reflected it in dazzling patterns. Dangerous, yes. Every aspect of Xenos seemed designed to challenge human survival, but also breathtaking. Kai wrapped the choice cuts of meat in preservative cloths that Elena had prepared from native plant fibers. His wife had become remarkably adept at adapting Earth techniques to Xenos materials, creating solutions to the daily challenges of life on an alien world. The thought of her waiting at their fortified homestead pushed Kai to move faster. Elena would be pleased with his successful hunt, and Lisa, their 5-year-old daughter, would clap her small hands in delight at the sight of fresh meat, her eyes wide with the uncomplicated joy of childhood. He hoisted the bundled meat onto his shoulders and secured it with straps fashioned from previous hunts. The weight was substantial but manageable. Kai had grown stronger during their years on Xenos, his body adapting to the physical demands of colonial life. The remaining portions of the carcass he buried beneath a pile of rocks, no sense letting it go to waste. The scavengers would find it, continuing the cycle of life in this strange ecosystem. The journey home would take approximately 6 hours at a steady pace. Kai began walking, his boots crunching on the blue-tinted gravel that covered much of the planet's surface. The settlers' colony was still small, only 28 families scattered across the fertile valley near the main water source. Most chose to live in the central compound, a collection of prefabricated structures surrounded by a defensive perimeter wall. Safety in numbers, Director Kovacs had always insisted, but Kai and Elena had chosen differently. After their second year on Xenos, they had built their home on the outskirts, nestled against a cliff that provided natural protection on one side. The location offered privacy, a spectacular view, and access to untapped resources. Elena had initially protested the isolation, concerned about Lisa's safety and their distance from the colony's medical facilities. But the privacy and the freedom to establish their own little corner of this alien world had eventually won her over. As he walked, Kai's mind wandered to the list of projects awaiting him at home. The eastern wall needed reinforcing before the next dust storm season. The water purification system required maintenance. The mineral content of Xenos water was different from Earth's, causing faster deterioration of filters. And he had promised Lisa he'd take her to the small pond where phosphorescent blue fish swam in lazy circles, their scales glowing with bioluminescence that fascinated his daughter. Normal life, routine concerns, the mundane worries that had replaced the existential terror of their first months on this alien planet. 4 hours into his journey, as Kai crested a familiar ridge that offered a view of the valley where their home stood, the first sign that something was wrong came when he couldn't see the usual smoke from their chimney. Elena always kept the fire going when he was due to return, especially as the nights grew cold. The smoke was a beacon, guiding him home through the alien landscape. The second sign was the silence. Even from this distance, he should have been able to hear the faint sounds of their home. The mechanical hum of the atmospheric filters, the distant notes of Elena's humming as she prepared dinner, the high-pitched giggles of Lisa playing with her handcrafted toys. But there was nothing, only the whisper of wind across the blue rocks and the sound of his own increasingly rapid breathing. Kai dropped the antelope meat and broke into a run, the knot of dread in his stomach tightening with each step. His boots slipped on loose stones, sending small avalanches of pebbles down the slope, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the distant structure that was their home, searching for movement, for signs of life. As he drew closer, his worst fears materialized before his eyes. The door to their home had been smashed open, the reinforced composite material splintered as if struck by tremendous force. The carefully cultivated garden that Elena had established over years of experimentation with native and earth plants was trampled. The irrigation system he had designed now nothing but broken pipes leaking precious water into the thirsty soil. Tools and equipment lay scattered around the entrance, some broken beyond repair. And scattered around the entrance were clear, unmistakable tracks, three-toed footprints that he recognized immediately as belonging to the Creons, the blue-skinned nomadic species native to Xenos. "Elena!" Kai shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Lisa!" He sprinted the remaining distance, his heart hammering against his ribs with such force that it felt like it might burst. The interior of their home was devastated. Furniture that had been carefully constructed from a combination of earth materials and native woods lay smashed into unrecognizable fragments. Storage containers had been emptied, their contents strewn across the floor or missing entirely. The family photos he had carefully preserved and displayed on the walls, precious reminders of Earth in their early days on Xenos, were shattered, the images now slashed or torn as if in deliberate malice. Kai moved through the wreckage in a daze, calling for his wife and daughter with increasing desperation. The common area, the small hydroponic setup where Elena grew earth vegetables, the work area where he maintained their equipment, all showed signs of violent destruction. But it was when he reached their bedroom that his world truly ended. Elena lay on the floor, her body contorted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes, which had always sparkled with intelligence and warmth, stared sightlessly at the ceiling. A crude spear had pierced her chest, the blue-tinted wooden shaft still protruding from her body. Her right arm was outstretched toward the corner where Lisa's small bed stood, her fingers frozen in a final desperate reaching gesture. Lisa's tiny form lay crumpled on her bed, her blonde hair matted with dried blood that appeared almost purple in the crimson light filtering through the broken window. Her small chest was still, her face peaceful in a way that suggested she might have been sleeping, if not for the smaller spear that had struck her. Kai fell to his knees between the bodies of his wife and daughter, a sound escaping his throat that was barely human, part scream, part sob, a primal expression of agony that seemed to come from somewhere beyond conscious thought. He reached out with trembling fingers to touch Elena's face, then Lisa's, as if contact might somehow reverse the horror before him, might breathe life back into their still forms. "No," he whispered, the word inadequate against the magnitude of his loss. "No, please. Not you. Not both of you." But there was no response. Only the terrible stillness of death and the gathering shadows as the crimson sun continued its descent outside. Minutes or hours passed, Kai couldn't tell. Time seemed to have lost meaning in the face of his grief. When he finally rose, something fundamental had changed within him. The rational, methodical engineer who had approached problems with careful analysis and measured responses was gone. In his place stood a man carved from cold fury, with a single purpose burning in his heart. Moving with mechanical precision, Kai closed Elena's eyes, then Lisa's. He straightened their bodies, folding their arms across their chests in a gesture of peace that belied the violence of their deaths. Then he followed the tracks outside, studying them with the detached concentration of a predator. Multiple sets of three-toed footprints led away from his home and into the desert to the north. The tracks were clear in the soft soil near the house, becoming more difficult to follow as they reached the rocky terrain beyond. But Kai could read them well enough. At least 6 Creons had been involved in the attack. Among the tracks, he spotted smaller marks, drops of blood that had fallen at intervals, creating a macabre trail leading into the desert. The Creons had always maintained distance from the human settlement. They were nomadic, following the migrations of the large herd animals across the blue deserts and moving their tribal camps frequently. The colony scientists, led by Dr. Reeves, considered them primitive but non-aggressive, with rudimentary language consisting of clicks and whistles, and tribal social structures centered around hunting and gathering. There had been occasional observation expeditions, even a few tentative trade attempts, where the colonists left supplies at designated locations and found native materials left in exchange. Some researchers had managed to observe Creon camps from a distance, documenting their movements and social behaviors. But direct contact had been limited and carefully managed. Nothing in their previous interactions had suggested violence of this nature. Nothing had prepared the colonists, had prepared Kai, for this level of brutality. He returned to their ruined home and moved with grim purpose, gathering supplies for what he knew would be a long journey. His hunting pack was equipped with basic survival gear: water purification tablets, a multi-tool, fire-starting equipment, emergency medical supplies. To this, he added food concentrates, extra water containers, and his mapping tools from the geological survey kit. For weapons, he took his hunting bow and a quiver of 20 arrows, his skinning knife, and a spear he had crafted from metallic debris salvaged from their landing craft. The spear had been a precaution, rarely used except for the largest game. Now it would serve a different purpose. Before leaving, Kai faced one final heart-wrenching task. He couldn't leave Elena and Lisa in the ruined house, exposed to the elements and the scavengers that would inevitably be drawn to the scent of death. With tools from his workshop, he dug a grave on the small rise behind their home, where the moon would shine directly overhead during its fullest phase. It had been Elena's favorite spot to sit in the evenings, identifying the unfamiliar constellations of Xenos and creating her own names for them, telling stories about them to Lisa. The ground was hard, unyielding, as if the planet itself resisted accepting the bodies of these interlopers from another world. Kai's hands blistered and bled as he worked, but he barely noticed the pain. It was insignificant compared to the agony in his heart. When the grave was ready, he wrapped Elena and Lisa in the blankets from their beds, carrying them together to their final resting place. He placed them side by side, Elena's arm around Lisa as if protecting her even in death. As he covered them with the rocky soil of Xenos, Kai felt something break inside him. The last remnants of the man he had been, the husband and father whose life had been defined by creation and protection. When he finally placed the last stone on the grave marker, the crimson sun was rising again, bathing the landscape in blood-red light that seemed fitting for the darkness that had descended on Kai's soul. He knelt beside the grave, his hand resting on the stone pile that now covered everything he had loved in the universe. "I will find them," he whispered, his voice rough from hours of silence broken only by the physical exertion of digging. "I will find every last one of them, and I will make them pay for what they did to you both. This I swear, by everything we shared, by the life we built here. They will know your names with their dying breaths." With those words, Kai shouldered his pack, checked his weapons, and began following the Creon tracks into the desert. Behind him, the ruins of his home grew smaller in the distance, a monument to everything he had lost. Ahead lay only one path, the trail of those who had destroyed his world, and the vengeance that now gave his existence its sole purpose. The trail was clear for the first day of tracking. The Creons had made no attempt to hide their passage, leaving a path of disturbed blue sand and occasional discarded items, primitive tools fashioned from bone and stone, remnants of food, scraps of the leathery material they used for clothing and shelter. Kai moved steadily, conserving his energy and water, driven by a cold fury that seemed to block out the scorching heat of the alien sun. He made camp as darkness fell, choosing a sheltered position between rock formations that offered protection from the night winds and concealment from any watching eyes. Sleep came in brief, restless intervals, interrupted by nightmares in which he heard Elena and Lisa calling for him, saw them reaching out as the Creon spear struck them. Each time he woke, the grief hit him anew, only to be channeled into the growing reservoir of rage that fueled his pursuit. On the second day, the desert terrain began to change, giving way to rocky badlands where tracking became more difficult. The blue sand that had held clear footprints was replaced by stone and sparse vegetation. Kai relied on his geological training, looking for subtle signs of passage, displaced stones, scraped surfaces, the occasional broken vegetation. The Creons were moving northeast, toward the mountains that local colonists had named the Spine of Xenos. By the third day, exhaustion began to take its toll. Kai's water supplies were running low, and the unrelenting sun beat down mercilessly through the thin atmosphere of Xenos, which offered little protection from radiation. Despite his protective clothing, his skin had begun to blister in places, and his lips were cracked from dehydration and the constant wind. Toward evening, he stumbled upon a small water source, a trickle emerging from between rocks, forming a shallow pool before disappearing again into the ground. Kai approached cautiously, testing the water for contaminants using the chemical indicators from his survival kit before drinking deeply and refilling his containers. As he rested beside the pool, movement caught his eye. At the opposite side, a small lizard-like creature with 6 legs and iridescent blue scales had emerged to drink. It froze when it noticed him, its vertical pupils dilating in the fading light. Kai remained motionless, observing. The creature, no larger than his forearm, flickered a forked tongue over the water's surface. After a moment's hesitation, it continued drinking, keeping Kai in its peripheral vision. Something about the creature's cautious resilience struck a chord in him. This was the nature of life on Xenos, constantly alert, fighting for survival in a beautiful but unforgiving world. Every native species had evolved elaborate adaptations to this harsh environment. The strong survived, the weak perished. It was a simple, brutal equation. When the lizard finally skittered away, Kai made his decision. The Creons would know this territory far better than he did. They had evolved here, adapted to its challenges over countless generations. A direct pursuit would only end in his death, and his vengeance would remain unfulfilled. He needed to become like the native predators of Xenos, patient, cunning, and lethal. He needed to become a hunter. For the next week, Kai shadowed the Creon tribe from a distance. He found their camp on the 4th day of his pursuit, a collection of hide-covered shelters arranged in a rough circle around central fire pits. Using his survey scope, he observed their patterns, learning their habits, their weaknesses, their routines. The tribe consisted of approximately 30 adults and a dozen younger ones of various ages. They moved with the practiced efficiency of those born to nomadic life, setting up temporary camps that they could dismantle within minutes if danger threatened. They hunted in small groups, gathered plants and water, maintained their tools and weapons. They seemed to have a clear social hierarchy, with deference shown to certain individuals marked by more elaborate patterns on their blue skin. Their appearance was both alien and disturbingly humanoid. Standing taller than the average human, their lanky bodies were covered in blue skin that ranged from pale azure to deep indigo. Their faces featured large, entirely black eyes that reminded Kai of ancient depictions of extraterrestrials from Earth folklore, flat nasal openings, and mouths that seemed too wide for their narrow heads. 3 fingers and a thumb adorned each hand, mirroring the 3-toed configuration of their feet that had left the distinctive tracks Kai had followed. Most disturbing to Kai was how ordinary their activities seemed. They cared for their young, shared food, communicated with complex series of clicks and whistles that clearly constituted language. They were not mindless beasts, but thinking beings with society and culture, and they had slaughtered his family without provocation. Kai crafted his first trap near a water source that the Creons visited regularly. He worked through the night, digging a pit and lining it with sharpened stakes fashioned from the dense, woody vegetation that grew in the more fertile pockets of the region. He camouflaged the pit with a covering of light branches in the blue-tinted soil, then concealed himself nearby to wait. The next morning, his vigil was rewarded when 2 Creon warriors approached the water source. They moved with the casual confidence of predators unaccustomed to being prey. Their spears held loosely, their posture relaxed. The first Creon stepped onto the camouflage pit and plunged through with a startled cramamon. The sound cut off abruptly as the stakes found their mark. The second warrior rushed forward, only to fall victim to the same trap. Kai watched dispassionately from his hiding place as their movements ceased. He felt neither triumph nor remorse, only a cold acknowledgement that the first step of his vengeance had been taken. 2 for Elena and Lisa. Many more to go. He moved on before the rest of the tribe could investigate, already planning his next strike. 3 days later, Kai orchestrated a rock slide in a narrow canyon that the Cryons used as a shortcut through the increasingly mountainous terrain. He had identified the geological weakness in the canyon wall, a fault line that could be exploited with minimal force applied at the right point. He waited until a group of Cryons entered the narrowest section, then triggered the collapse using a lever system fashioned from branches and the principles of basic physics. 4 more Cryons perished beneath the cascade of stones. Their alien clicking turned to screams that echoed off the canyon walls before being silenced by the crushing weight of rock. The tribe began to show signs of unease. Kai observed through his scope as they doubled their guards, performed what appeared to be religious rituals around their fires, and changed their routes unpredictably. They no longer moved with the same easy confidence that had marked their behavior when Kai first began observing them. Now they looked over their shoulders, scanned the horizon, examined the ground before each step. Kai adapted. He crafted arrows and coated the tips with the sap of a plant whose defensive toxins caused paralysis in the local wildlife. By night, he crept close to their camps and picked off sentries with silent precision. By day, he studied the land ahead of them, preparing ambushes and traps along possible routes. To the Cryons, he became a ghost, unseen, untraceable, but ever present. A demon that struck without warning and disappeared without trace. They began to travel only in larger groups, abandoning their usual hunting patterns, which made them easier to track but harder to isolate. 2 weeks into his campaign, Kai finally encountered resistance. A hunting party of 6 warriors had been dispatched to find him, following his trail with unexpected skill. They moved in a search pattern that suggested they had experience tracking dangerous prey, communicating with subtle gestures and quiet clicks that wouldn't alert their target. Kai led them into the Badlands, where the rocky terrain offered countless hiding places. When one warrior separated slightly from the group, Kai loosed an arrow from his concealed position. It struck true, burying itself in the warrior's neck where the blue skin appeared thinner. The paralytic toxin took effect almost immediately, causing the Cretan to collapse mid-step. The remaining 5 spread out, communicating with rapid clicking sounds and gestures that Kai was beginning to recognize as their equivalent of tactical coordination. They knew they were being hunted now, and they were responding with the organized defense of experienced fighters. Kai retreated deeper into the maze of wind-carved stone formations, using his knowledge of erosion patterns to predict which passages would narrow or dead-end. He managed to isolate another warrior and dispatched him with his spear, but not before the Cryon let out a warning cry that echoed through the stone corridors. The hunt had become mutual. For hours, Kai played a deadly game of hide-and-seek with the remaining Cryons. He used his smaller size to advantage, squeezing through narrow gaps that the taller aliens couldn't follow. He set false trails, doubling back and using the high ground to observe their movements. He managed to eliminate a 3rd warrior with a well-placed arrow, but the final 3 remained stubbornly together, watching each other's backs as they continued their methodical search. As the crimson sun began to set, Kai found himself cornered in a box canyon. The only exit was the way he had entered, and the 3-toed footprints in the soft sand showed that his pursuers were converging on his position from multiple directions. For the first time since beginning his quest for vengeance, fear crept into his consciousness. Not fear of death itself, but fear of failing in his sworn mission. Night fell. The moon of Xenos cast shadows that created a disorienting pattern of light and darkness across the rocky landscape. Kai pressed himself into a crevice, controlling his breathing as he had learned to do during geological surveys in unstable cave systems. The darkness was both ally and enemy. It hid him from sight, but it also concealed the approaching hunters. A shadow detached itself from the greater darkness. A Cryon warrior, moving with predatory grace, passed within arm's reach of Kai's hiding spot. In the moonlight, the patterns on the warrior's blue skin were visible, swirling marks that might have been decorative or might have signified rank or accomplishments. The alien carried a spear in one 3-fingered hand and what appeared to be a sling in the other. Kai waited until the Cryon had moved past before emerging silently from his concealment. His knife found the back of the warrior's neck, severing what he hoped was a vital point in their alien anatomy. The Cryon collapsed without a sound, its weapons falling uselessly to the ground. But the victory was short-lived. A whistling sound was Kai's only warning before a projectile, a crude dart, grazed his arm. Almost immediately, numbness spread from the wound. The Kreons were using their own toxins. Fighting the spreading paralysis, Kai stumbled through the darkness, no longer concerned with stealth. His vision began to blur, and his limbs grew increasingly unresponsive. He fell once, twice, each time forcing himself back to his feet through sheer determination. The memory of Elena and Lisa drove him forward even as his body betrayed him. A rock outcropping loomed ahead, a potential shelter where he might make a final stand. Kai dragged himself toward it, aware of the pursuing footsteps drawing closer. The paralysis had reached his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. His fingers were numb, barely able to grasp his knife. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the moon of Xenos, hanging in the night sky like a watchful eye, indifferent to the struggles of the tiny beings playing out their dramas of life and death beneath its cold light. Kai awoke to pain, a deep, throbbing ache that encompassed his entire body. His mouth was dry, his tongue swollen with thirst. He tried to move and discovered that he was bound tightly with some form of fibrous material that cut into his skin when he struggled. Blinking against the harsh light of the crimson sun, he assessed his situation. He was propped against a rock at the edge of what appeared to be a temporary Kreon camp. Dozens of hide-covered shelters formed a rough circle with a larger structure at the center. Kreons moved about, some casting wary glances in his direction, others seemingly ignoring his presence as they went about their daily activities. A shadow fell across him. Kai looked up to see a Kreon standing over him, taller than the others, with deep indigo skin marked with elaborate patterns that spiraled from around its large black eyes, down its neck, and across what was visible of its chest. The Kreon's wide mouth opened, emitting a series of clicks and guttural sounds that Kai couldn't begin to interpret. When Kai didn't respond, the Kreon knelt and studied him with those unsettling black eyes that seemed to contain no white, only a depthless darkness that reflected Kai's own image back at him. From a pouch at his waist, the Kreon withdrew a small knife with a blade that appeared to be made from a crystalline substance rather than metal. For a moment, Kai thought his end had come, a quick death at the hands of his enemy, but instead the Kreon made a shallow cut on Kai's cheek, then stepped back to observe his reaction. Kai refused to show pain. He stared back defiantly, his hatred burning in his eyes with an intensity that needed no translation across the species barrier. The Kreon seemed to consider this, tilting its head in what might have been curiosity or assessment. Then it made a gesture to others nearby. Two warriors approached and hauled Kai to his feet. Though his limbs were still partially numb from the toxin, he was forced to walk through the camp, stumbling between his captors. The Kreons gathered to watch, some clicking and whistling among themselves in what sounded like excited discussion, others maintaining a wary distance. Kai was brought to the central structure. A large tent made from hides stretched over a framework of bones or branches. Inside, the light was dimmer, filtered through the semi-translucent material of the tent walls, casting everything in a blue-tinged glow that made the assembled Kreons look even more alien. In the center sat what appeared to be an elder Kreon, its blue skin faded to a pale cyan, its body frail compared to the warriors. Its eyes, however, were alert and piercing, studying Kai with an intelligence that transcended the barriers of species and language. Around it were arranged various objects that Kai recognized with a jolt of fury, items from his home, from his family. A bracelet that had belonged to Lisa, a carved wooden figure he had made for Elena on their 5th anniversary. Trophies. They had taken trophies from their kills. The rage that flooded through Kai gave him new strength. He lunged toward the elder, only to be restrained by the warriors on either side of him. They forced him to his knees before the ancient Kreon, holding him firmly despite his struggles. The elder chittered something, and the tall Kreon who had cut him, apparently some kind of leader, responded with a series of clicks and gestures that included pointing at Kai several times. A discussion of sorts followed, with different Kreons contributing. Though Kai couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear enough. Some argued for his immediate death, others for some alternative he couldn't guess at. Throughout it all, the elder remained mostly silent, watching Kai with ancient eyes that seemed to hold a deeper understanding than the others. Occasionally, it would interject a brief series of clicks that immediately silenced whoever was speaking, suggesting its authority was absolute despite its physical frailty. Finally, the elder raised a three-fingered hand, and silence fell. It spoke, its voice a weaker version of the clicks and whistles Kai had come to associate with Creon speech, but with a rhythmic quality that suggested formal pronouncement. When it finished, the leader nodded and turned to Kai. With deliberate movements, he drew a line across his own throat, the universal gesture for death. Then he pointed to the sun, tracing its path across the sky, and held up one finger. The message was clear enough. Kai had until tomorrow's sunset to live. He was dragged back to the edge of the camp and secured to a post driven into the ground. His bonds were loosened just enough to allow him to sit, but not to stand or reach the knots that held him. A small container of water was placed within reach, presumably to keep him alive until his execution. As the day wore on, Kai tested his bonds repeatedly, seeking any weakness. The crayons had been thorough. The fibrous material cut into his wrists when he struggled, but showed no signs of fraying or loosening. The post was set too deeply to be worked free. His weapons had been taken, along with anything that might have served as a tool for escape. Crayons passed by occasionally, some stopping to stare at him with curious black eyes. A few made threatening gestures or clicked angrily at him, perhaps relatives of those he had killed. Children were kept away, shepherded back by adults whenever their curiosity brought them too close to the dangerous alien prisoner. Kai glared back at those who approached, his hatred undiminished by his captivity. Each crayon he saw was a reminder of those who had taken everything from him. If they expected fear or submission, they would be disappointed. He would face his death as he had faced the challenges of Xenos, with determination and defiance. As night fell, the camp grew quieter. Fires were lit, casting flickering orange light across the blue landscape. The crayons gathered in groups, sharing food and what might have been stories or songs, their clicking speech rising and falling in patterns that suggested communication beyond mere information exchange. Kai watched, his scientist's mind still functioning despite his rage. He observed their interactions, noting how the adults cared for the young, how they deferred to the elder, how they organized their shared tasks. They were not the mindless savages he had convinced himself they were. They had society, structure, perhaps even culture. But this understanding did nothing to lessen his hatred. They had still slaughtered his family. They had still destroyed everything he loved. Whatever else they might be, they were murderers, and he had sworn vengeance. As the night deepened, most of the crayons retired to their shelters. Two warriors remained on guard near Kai, watching him with alert black eyes that reflected the starlight. They were taking no chances with their prisoner, even bound as he was. Kai dozed fitfully, his dreams filled with images of Elena and Lisa, sometimes whole and happy, sometimes as he had found them, broken and lifeless. He woke repeatedly, his grief as fresh as the moment he had discovered their bodies. Dawn brought renewed activity to the camp. The crayons emerged from their shelters, beginning their daily routines. Kai was given more water and a portion of some kind of food, a paste made from what might have been local plants or insects. He refused it initially, but hunger eventually drove him to consume the alien sustenance, which had a bitter, pungent taste that made him gag. Throughout the day, preparations were made for what Kai assumed would be his execution. A large open area at the center of the camp was cleared. A frame of wooden poles was erected, resembling a primitive scaffold. Crayons came to view him with increasing frequency, their manner ranging from curious to hostile. The leader, Kai had begun to think of him as the war leader, visited once accompanied by the elder. They stood before him, studying him as one might study an interesting but dangerous specimen. The elder clicked something, and the war leader responded with a gesture toward the scaffold. As sunset approached, tension in the camp increased. Kai was unbound from the post, but kept securely tied as he was marched to the central area. The entire tribe had gathered, forming a circle around the cleared space. The scaffold stood starkly against the crimson sky, its wooden beams silhouetted against the setting sun. The war leader stepped forward, carrying Kai's own spear, the one he had crafted from the landing craft debris. The irony wasn't lost on Kai. He would die by the same weapon he had used to hunt the Creons, a symmetry that might have been poetic if it weren't so bitter. The war leader addressed the assembled Creons, his clicks and whistles rising in what was clearly a formal speech. He gestured to Kai repeatedly, then to the sky, then made sweeping motions that encompassed the entire tribe. Was he recounting Kai's crimes? Explaining the reason for his execution? Or was this some ritual unknown to human understanding? When he finished, the Creons responded with a unified sound, a sharp collective click that resonated through the gathering like the closing of a door. Kai was brought to the scaffold and secured to it, his arms spread and bound to the crossbeam, his feet barely touching the ground. The war leader approached, spear raised. This was it then. Kai would die by his own weapon, unable to complete his vengeance. He straightened as much as his bonds would allow, determined to face death with the same courage Elena must have shown when defending their home. But the war leader didn't strike immediately. Instead, he positioned himself a short distance away, spear poised to throw. A ritual killing then, a spectacle for the tribe. Perhaps his death would serve as a warning to other humans who might threaten the Creons. As the war leader prepared to launch the spear, a commotion broke out at the edge of the gathering. A Creon pushed through the crowd, clicking urgently. It approached the war leader, gesturing animatedly toward the northeast. Its blue skin was covered in dust, and it moved with the weariness of one who had traveled far and fast. The war leader lowered the spear, listening intently. Whatever news had arrived, it was significant enough to interrupt the execution. After a brief exchange, he turned to the assembled tribe and issued what were clearly orders. The Creons dispersed quickly, moving with purpose toward their shelters. Kai remained bound to the scaffold, forgotten in the sudden activity. Around him, the camp transformed as the Creons began dismantling their shelters and gathering their possessions. They were breaking camp, preparing to move. But why? The answer came in the form of a distant sound carried on the wind, a high-pitched keening that raised the hair on the back of Kai's neck. It was unlike anything he had heard on Xenos before, neither the call of any known predator nor any weather phenomenon he had encountered. The Creons' pace increased, their movements now tinged with what could only be described as fear. The war leader reappeared, accompanied by two warriors. They cut Kai down from the scaffold but kept his hands bound. The war leader spoke to him, naturally receiving no comprehension in return. Frustrated, he pointed to Kai, then to the northeast, then made a slashing motion across his throat. The message was clear enough. Something dangerous approached from the northeast, something that threatened both Creon and human alike. Kai was dragged along as the tribe completed its hasty departure. Within an hour, the camp had vanished, the Creons moving with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to nomadic life. They traveled southwest, away from whatever threat had been detected, maintaining a punishing pace that Kai struggled to match with his bound hands. As they crested a ridge, Kai got his first glimpse of what pursued them. In the valley beyond their abandoned camp, shapes moved, massive, segmented bodies that writhed across the landscape with disturbing speed. Even at this distance, he could make out details. Multi-legged creatures resembling the enormous centipedes, their blue-black carapaces reflecting the fading sunlight in oily patterns. The Creons didn't pause to observe. They continued their retreat, now with even greater urgency. Kai was pulled along, stumbling occasionally on the rough terrain. The war leader glanced back at him, his expression unreadable, but his intent clear. Kai would come with them, willing or not. Night fell, but the tribe didn't stop. They traveled by moonlight, navigating the difficult landscape with a familiarity born of generations living on this harsh world. Kai's energy flagged, his legs burning with exhaustion, but the alternative to keeping pace was being left behind for the creatures that followed, a fate he suspected would be worse than whatever the Creons had planned for him. Near midnight, they reached a series of rocky outcroppings that formed natural barriers. Here, finally, the Creons halted. They established a minimal camp. No fires, no shelters, just groupings among the rocks where they could rest while maintaining watch. Kai was secured to a boulder, given water but no food. The war leader approached, accompanied by the elder. They studied him in the moonlight, then conferred briefly. The elder reached out, touching Kai's bound hands, then made a gesture to the war leader. To Kai's surprise, the war leader drew a knife and cut his bonds. Kai rubbed his raw wrists, eyeing the Creons warily. Why free him now? The war leader pointed to the way they had come, then to Kai, then made a shooing motion. He was being released, allowed to leave? The elder clicked something, and the war leader reluctantly handed Kai his knife. Not his original hunting knife, but a crude crayon blade made from what appeared to be sharpened bone. The message was clear. Kai could go, and he was being given the means to defend himself, minimally, against whatever lurked in the darkness. Kai looked back the way they had come, then to the southwest, where the human colony lay. He could attempt to return home, to what remained of it, or he could continue with the Creons toward whatever destination they sought. The decision was made for him by another sound, that same high-pitched keening, closer now. The creatures were still following, and they were gaining. The war leader clicked urgently, gesturing for the tribe to move out again. Kai found himself swept along in their renewed flight, no longer a prisoner, but not quite an ally. They traveled through the night and into the following day, taking brief rests but never stopping for long. The terrain grew increasingly mountainous, with narrow passes and steep inclines that slowed their progress. The creatures, which the Creons seemed to both fear and understand, remained in pursuit, their distinctive cries occasionally reaching the fleeing group. During one rest period, Kai found himself near the elder, who was being assisted by younger Creons due to its frailty. The ancient being studied him with those deep black eyes, then reached into a pouch and withdrew something that glinted in the sunlight, a small crystal formation, not unlike those Kai had studied during his geological surveys. The elder held it out, clicking softly. When Kai hesitated, it took his hand and pressed the crystal into his palm, curling his fingers around it. The crystal was cool to the touch, its surface oddly textured with microscopic facets that caught the light in mesmerizing patterns. Before Kai could determine what this gesture might mean, a warning cry came from the rear of the group. The keening sound was much closer now, and with it came a new noise, a skittering, chitinous sound of many legs moving rapidly over rock. The Creons abandoned any pretense of rest, rushing to gather their minimal possessions. The war leader shouted orders, organizing the tribe into a more defensive formation, with the youngest and eldest in the center, warriors on the perimeter. Kai found himself pushed toward the center alongside the elder. This protection puzzled him. Why would they bother to safeguard the very human who had been hunting them? Was it because he had been given the crystal? Did that signify some kind of status change? There was no time to ponder these questions. The first of the creatures crested the ridge behind them, its segmented body flowing over the rocks with horrifying grace. It was even larger than Kai had estimated from a distance, at least 10 meters long, with dozens of jointed legs that moved in uncanny coordination. Its armored head featured no eyes that he could discern, but multiple antennae that twitched constantly, sampling the air. The Creon warriors faced it with spears and slings, their weapons looking pitifully inadequate against the creature's natural armor. Yet they stood their ground, forming a line between the monster and their tribe. The creature paused, its antenna waving as if assessing the threat before it. Then it charged, its many legs propelling it forward with startling speed. The warriors loosed their weapons, some striking true between the armored segments. The creature screeched but didn't slow. It hit the defensive line, sending Creons flying with sweeps of its powerful front legs. Its mandibles snapped, catching one warrior and cutting him nearly in half. The tribe scattered, their organized retreat dissolving into chaos. Kai found himself separated from the main group, the elder still nearby, supported by a young female Creon. Behind them, more of the massive creatures appeared over the ridge. The situation was rapidly deteriorating from retreat to rout. A narrow ravine offered potential shelter. Kai pointed toward it, catching the female Creon's attention. She understood, helping the elder in that direction while Kai covered their rear with his bone knife. A pathetic defense, but all he had. They reached the ravine just as one of the creatures noticed them. It skittered sideways with alarming agility, cutting off their escape route. The female Creon pushed the elder behind her, raising what appeared to be a ceremonial staff in defense. Kai assessed their options rapidly. The ravine was too narrow for the creature to follow, but they'd never reach it in time. They needed a distraction. Without fully understanding his own actions, Kai charged toward the creature, shouting to draw its attention. The bone knife felt insubstantial in his hand, but he brandished it nonetheless. The creature turned toward him, antennae quivering at this new threat. Kai feinted to one side, then ducked under the creature's striking front leg. He drove his knife into the softer joint between two armored segments, eliciting a screech of pain. The creature thrashed, nearly crushing him beneath its writhing body, but he rolled clear. "Go!" he shouted to the female Creon, gesturing frantically toward the ravine. Though she couldn't understand his words, his intent was clear. She hesitated only briefly before guiding the elder toward the shelter of the narrow passage. The creature recovered quickly, rearing up on its back segments to bring its full height to bear. Kai backed away, searching desperately for another weapon, another strategy. His back hit rock. He'd run out of space to retreat. The creature loomed over him, mandibles clicking in what almost seemed like anticipation. This was it then, not execution at the hands of the Creons, but death in the jaws of an alien predator. Strangely, his thoughts weren't of his own survival, but of Elena and Lisa. Would he see them again, in whatever came after? A spear arced through the air, striking the creature's head with enough force to penetrate one of its sensory clusters. It reared back, screeching in pain and confusion. The war leader stood a short distance away, already knocking another spear in a throwing stick. More Creon warriors appeared, launching a coordinated attack on the creature. They targeted its joints and sensory organs with precision, displaying a knowledge of the monster's vulnerabilities that spoke of previous encounters. Kai didn't waste the opportunity. He sprinted for the ravine, reaching it just as the creature collapsed under the Creon's assault. The female Creon and the elder were already deep within the narrow passage, safe for the moment. The war leader and several warriors joined them, retreating into the ravine as more creatures appeared on the ridge. The narrow walls provided protection. The creatures were too large to follow, but they were also potentially trapped if the ravine didn't lead to an exit. They moved deeper into the passage, which wound between towering rock formations. The sounds of the creatures faded somewhat, though occasional screeches echoed off the stone walls, reminding them that the danger had not passed. After nearly an hour of navigating the twisting ravine, they emerged into a small, hidden valley nestled among the mountains. A spring bubbled up from between rocks, forming a pool of clear water before disappearing underground again. Sparse vegetation clung to the rocky soil, enough to provide minimal cover, if not comfort. Other Creons were already there, having found the sanctuary through different routes. They were setting up a more permanent camp than the hasty rest of their flight, suggesting that they believed this place offered genuine safety. The war leader issued orders, organizing defensive positions at the various entrances to the valley. Warriors moved with purpose, setting up what appeared to be alarm systems, using strings of small bones or shells that would rattle if disturbed. Kai found himself at a loss. He was no longer a prisoner, yet not truly free. The Creons seemed to be ignoring him for the most part, focused on establishing their defenses and caring for their wounded. The female Creon who had helped the elder approached him, offering a container of water. Kai accepted it cautiously, his thirst overcoming his suspicion. She watched him drink, her head tilted in what might have been curiosity. When he finished, she pointed to his hand, to the crystal the elder had given him. Then she touched her chest and made a circular gesture that encompassed the entire valley. Was she trying to tell him that the crystal somehow connected him to this place? To the tribe? Before he could attempt to understand, a commotion arose from one of the valley entrances. Warriors gathered, weapons ready, as something approached. Not the giant creatures. The alarm systems remained undisturbed, but something else. Through the narrow opening stumbled a Creon female, her blue skin pale with exhaustion or injury. In her arms, she clutched a small bundle protectively against her chest. The warriors lowered their weapons, recognizing one of their own. The female collapsed as soon as she reached the safety of the valley. Others rushed to her aid, including the one who had given Kai water. The bundle in her arms squirmed and emitted a high-pitched sound that Kai recognized with a jolt. A cry, an infant's cry. The injured female was taken to one of the shelters that had already been erected. The war leader and the elder conferred briefly before following. Kai found himself drawn after them, driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain. He approached the shelter cautiously, staying far enough back to observe without intruding. The injured female lay on a bed of soft hides, her breathing labored. The bundle, a Creon infant, its blue skin several shades lighter than the adults, was being examined by the elder. The war leader noticed Kai and started toward him, his posture threatening. But the elder clicked something that made him pause. After a moment's consideration, the war leader stepped aside, allowing Kai to approach. The injured female looked up as Kai neared, her large black eyes fixed on him with an emotion he couldn't read. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. She clutched the infant closer, a gesture so fundamentally maternal that it transcended species. And in that moment, Kai froze. The female, protecting her child with the last of her strength. The way she curled her body around the infant, shielding it from perceived threat. The fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for her offspring. In that moment, Kai saw Elena reflected in the alien female, Elena who had died defending their home, their child. The spear in her chest, her arm outstretched toward Lisa's bed. She had fought to protect what she loved, just as this Creon female had carried her child through danger to reach safety. And the infant, so small, so vulnerable, utterly dependent on the protection of others, like Lisa had been, like all children were. Regardless of species, the rage that had driven Kai for weeks faltered, replaced by an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. Not forgiveness, he could never forgive the death of his family, but understanding, perhaps, recognition of a common ground that transcended the differences between human and Creon. The female's condition was clearly grave. Her breathing grew more labored and a dark fluid seeped from a wound in her side. The elder worked over her, applying what must have been medicinal substances, but the outcome seemed inevitable. She clicked weakly, looking from the war leader to the elder to her child. Even without understanding the words, Kai recognized a dying request when he heard one. She was securing the future of her infant. The elder responded gently, placing a three-fingered hand on the female's head in what appeared to be a blessing or comfort. The war leader added his own assurance. His normally harsh clicks softened. Satisfied, the female relaxed slightly. Her gaze shifted to Kai, standing at the edge of the shelter. Something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the universal nature of loss and love. Then her eyes closed for the final time, her arms going limp around her child. The infant made a small sound, drawing Kai's attention. So tiny, so defenseless. A life beginning just as another ended. A cycle that was the same on any world, for any species. Kai's hand tightened around the crystal the elder had given him. He looked from the orphaned infant to the war leader, to the ravine entrance where the sounds of the creatures could still be heard. His path forward was uncertain, filled with complexities he could barely imagine. But he had taken the first step away from the darkness, frozen in that moment of recognition. That moment when he saw himself reflected in the desperate protection of a dying mother for her child.